So, hello everyone, welcome to the Empathy Week webinar series for 2021. I am delighted to have Dr. Katherine Train and Dr. Lidewij Niezink with us. They are two women that have, I said to them just before, I'm going to introduce them in a different way to maybe how they usually introduce, which is, you know, a list of their accomplishments and achievements, of which there are many, and which I can't remember. But also because I have a very human approach and relationship with these two women, because they have helped so much with Empathy Week this year. They are the brains and, you know, the kind of empathy scientists behind what Empathy Week stands for, and we might get onto that later on. But they've both been like independent scholars, researchers and practitioners in empathy, spanning kind of 30 years. Not to be rude, but that's what's on the that's what you tell me, around 30 years. And they have very different, they come from different backgrounds in empathy, which I think is something that would be really interesting to explore. But together they are Empathic Intervision, which we will get onto that. And we are going to talk about how empathy can be a tool to get to know the world, to understand people that are different from you, and how it can be really utilized as a tool. And yeah, firstly, I just want to welcome Lidewij, welcome Katherine, and we're going to get straight into the questions. And I'm excited for people to see the dynamic that you two have as well, because you go, oh, do you want to answer that question first? I'm going to start with.
Up to you, Katherine. Yeah.
I'm going to start with, what is empathy? The question that you hate because you get asked it all the time. But one of you to kick us off.
So, which version would you like? Ed, would you like an elaborate version of all that it encompasses, or shall we just start simple, maybe?
For the sake of everyone, let's start simple, because even I am still. People think that, oh, you know, empathy, you must know everything. It's like every time I speak to you two, I learn more and more and more. But yeah, let's start simple and work our way up.
Yeah. So what we do is really when we try to keep it simple, which I think is important in all empathy work, is we say empathy is being able to hold a space for another person to express themselves as they are, in whatever way they want to express themselves. So really to hold that space for the experience of somebody else. Hey, Katherine, something to add?
Yeah, I say absolutely. And I think really that the holding space is really the important part. And I think also to add is that it is a process. It's not a one-off thing. So it is a process around through that holding a space, allowing them to express themselves and showing that you are attempting to understand their situation, be it their thoughts, be it their feeling, be it their life context, from their point of view.
Amazing. What do you think about often the saying that's used with empathy? Probably the most popular saying is to step into someone else's shoes. How much do you agree, disagree with that? Would you elaborate on that? How does your idea of empathy fit into that, and where could it be tweaked if it needs to be?
Yeah. So shall I take this one first?
Yes.
So there are different components to empathy, and there's being aware of and having some experience of the feeling of another person. And then there's also having thoughts about their experiences. So actually about, you know, thinking more about their experience. And part of that, or part of how one can do that, is in a sense, you could say metaphorically, putting yourself into their shoes or walking in their shoes, because what one is trying to do is one is trying to have an experience similar to their life in their shoes. So, but not always, sort of easier said than done. So we think, it often is the easy thing that is said, but maybe not quite understood. And I really like the way Lidewij explains, a little bit about the difference between you in their shoes or them in their shoes. So I'm going to hand over to her there.
Yeah, so that's what we do, when we talk about how would you be in your shoes, we're going to put ourselves in the other person's shoes. And that's what we call in psychology, we call that an imagined self perspective. How would I be if I would be in the shoes of that other person? And that's a very interesting question. But as many might already start understanding, there's something wrong with that question. And that is that you're actually asking about yourself in the shoes of the other person. And the danger with that is that you're going to interpret those shoes in terms of the way you see the world. If I would be in your shoes, I would need this, I would feel that, I would do this. And that's what you're going to project on another person. So that imagined self perspective is like the first thing we do when we start empathizing, perspective taking with somebody else. But we need to be really conscious of the fact that that is still about you in their shoes. So the real question is, how is the other person in their shoes? And that's the imagined other perspective. How do they feel? How do they experience? What do they want? What do they need in those shoes? And that's what we're trying to get into when we're empathizing with somebody else. We're trying to, when we take that perspective, we're trying to find the perspective of that other person rather than of ourselves in those shoes.
And that's difficult, right? Because we all have our own.
Exactly.
I think that's the trouble with empathy is people want to have it and have it in abundance and use it, and that's it, and it's a tick box exercise and you have a certificate and off you go. But actually it's not like that. And as you've described, it's this idea that we project onto other people. I think it's quite a useful term for younger children, but I think as they get older, you're absolutely right, this idea of projecting on my cultural experience, my cultural background, and how I've been brought up in the world is going to impact that if I am putting myself into someone else's shoes. And actually, as you've said, the simple definition of allowing space for someone to come and express themselves as they are is such a lovely way of putting empathy, because it's actually about handing over the microphone to the other person rather than watching them and then you still holding on to that microphone and displaying what you think.
Exactly.
And this links very much with self-empathy as well, which is something that I have learned over the course of this year from you two in particular. And it's one of the 5 integrative empathy skills that you talk about. And it's also the focus of your kind of blog series on Psychology Today, is that, I think, the website?
Yes.
Self-empathy is, I think, the problem with maybe that term for people coming new to it is they associate it with self-love or self-compassion. We're going to kind of leave it there in terms of a starting point of a conversation. Yeah. What is self-empathy, and why is it the start of empathy, and why is it not self-love and self-compassion?
Yeah.
Interesting. I was just looking through some of our writing about that at the moment, so it's very fresh in my mind.
Well, you go, Katherine.
So maybe to answer your second question first is, why is it the start of empathy? Is that when you are holding that space for somebody else, you very often come with, even just in a practical sense, a whole lot of things that have been happening in your life. So you might be hungry even, you might be thirsty, you might be tired. Whatever you're experiencing in your own life at that moment, you're very likely to see the world through that kind of lens, you could say. So you're going to interpret what you see according to what you're feeling yourself. So that's why we always start with self-empathy. So at least if I'm hungry or thirsty and I'm walking down a street where a lot of people appear to be starving, I might interpret it very differently. I might interpret what they need differently than if I'm full, which, you know, both ways will impact on empathy with those people. So that's the reason why. It's just so that I know, you know, what am I, how am I feeling, what am I thinking in this situation as I am now, so that I can have more of a clarity to be able to see the people in front of me. So that's the one thing. Then, and also to be able to, you know, if you're very tired or stressed or full of your own experiences, it's very difficult to hold a space for somebody else, because you're wanting to create that space so that other person can enter into it. So if it's full of your own noise, you're not going to be able to do that. So self-empathy is really about bringing your own attention away from the rest of the world into yourself, in order that you can become aware of your own experience of thoughts and feelings, in order that you can be able to understand what's going on, name it, make meaning of it, and then hold space, create space for the other person.
And I think that last point's really important, right? When you say, you know, people confuse it with self-love or self-care, self-compassion, which is true, right? A lot of when we now read about self-empathy, you know, people start writing about self-empathy, but what they start writing about is often either self-compassion, which is you become aware of what's going on inside you and you bring kindness to what happens inside, right? So you have compassion with your own experience. Or it's about self-care, where they say you can't empathize with others if you don't, you can't love others if you don't love yourself. You can't empathize with others if you don't care for yourself. But in our view, self-empathy is not self-care. Self-care is self-empathy can lead to self-care. You might need self-care, but that is not the self-empathy itself. So for us, you know, to create that space within yourself in order to be able to empathize with others, that's what the self-empathy is for. That's why we practice self-empathy. So to become aware, which is more like mindfulness, self-awareness, then to bring a non-judgmental attitude to it, which is to say, you're always judging what happens, right? Oh, I feel hungry. Oh, how annoying. Oh, that's a judgment. Or, oh, I feel happy. I feel great today. That's a judgment. You know, whether it's positive, whether it's negative, it's always a judgment. So to learn to recognize that as, hey, you know, I'm not here to judge what's happening. I'm here to observe what's happening and work with it in such a way that I can bring my attention to the other person, so that I can empathize with the other person, hold that space for the other person by creating a space inside ourselves.
Amazing.
Does it make sense?
Yeah. Yes, it makes sense to me, but I still have to think about it. It's, you know, despite I'm imagining people watching this or watching it back and listening to it, your brain's going to be like, oh, okay, yeah, no, that is self-love and that's self-compassion, and it is confusing. But once you do get it, and once you do try and really hone in on those skills, I think it becomes more and more powerful and more useful.
Yeah.
Self-empathy is just one of the 5 skills that, you know, or 5 integrated empathy skills that you have kind of taught me and have been integrated also into the Empathy Week program, very much kind of behind the scenes, but have helped to structure it. But before we get to that point, I wanted to talk about both of your histories in terms of empathy is very, you know, trendy, maybe is the right word to say now, or is becoming, you know, more and more searched, especially with the pandemic, especially with everything that's going on in the world. And it's often also used it's always related to something, maybe negative isn't the right word, but something where we have to be kind. Whereas actually you've taught me that empathy is about positive things as well. And you can have empathy where there is no suffering and there isn't a need for compassion. But how did you, before we get onto that bit, which I think is really interesting to discuss about how empathy can be used in a positive setting and should be, how did you meet even, and how did you come together? Because you come from different disciplines, so I don't know. Maybe I'll ask Katherine to start with how did you come into this empathy world, and then how did you meet Lidewij, and then we'll switch over.
Pass to her. So, I mean, I came to empathy probably, it was a journey. And I can actually remember my first encounter with empathy. I was studying pharmacy, which was 25 years ago or so. And I had this one professor that I really connected with. And I actually can remember the lecture hall. And I remember her standing on the top of the stage at this lecture hall. And I remember her saying, and so she was, this was pharmacy is chemistry and medicines and drugs and all the rest of it. And I remember her saying, there's something that I think is really important for pharmacy. I don't know a lot about it, but I think it's important, and that is empathy. And that kind of just stuck in my mind. And then as I was studying further, and I was doing a lot of practicals here in South Africa, where conditions in the hospitals and the clinics can be very, very kind of confrontational and challenging. And, you're often confronted with a waiting room full of a lot of people who are living in very difficult circumstances. And I just realized that actually I was almost lost. So the knowledge that I had and the chemistry that I knew was nothing in the face of these people who looked so desperate and often been sitting in queues, since 3 o'clock in the morning, traveling for hours on foot or crowded buses or whatever. And so that really kind of sparked a journey for me. And I wanted to understand, just handing over that little white packet full of pills seemed so insignificant given all the rest of the context. So I went back and I studied, I did a coaching training which was based on empathy. And then I did my master's and looked at empathy in pharmacy practice. And then my PhD in a business school, just looking at how kind of in the organization, the whole organization, how do we encourage people to practice empathy in a more structured way. So I was working myself in training and researching empathy, more in organizations. A lot was in healthcare. And I just finished my PhD, and I posted on LinkedIn, sort of, look at me, I'm ready to be noticed in the world. And Lidewij noticed me. So it's a little bit like we talk about our internet dating. And
you were the founders of it. You founded all the app ideas and through LinkedIn. Love that.
Yeah. So we connected through LinkedIn. We had a few sort of LinkedIn messages over a couple of years, actually. And then a project came up in South Africa that Lidewij had been invited to do by an organization here, and she invited me to work with her on it. And Empathic Intervision was born through we did a 3-year project together in an NGO, a non-governmental organization. And through that, it worked well. We worked well together. Maybe our empathy skills helped us to overcome cultural differences, or we have a very different approach. So I come through a medical background, but we've been working together mostly online ever since, sort of almost every day.
Yeah, true.
Yeah.
Amazing. And then Lidewij, so we now know how you two met, but what were you doing before you were stalked
before we
by
met?
Each other over? Well, no, you were stalking Katherine, weren't you, online?
Yeah, I was her. Yeah.
Hunting other empathic people across the internet. Yeah.
Exactly. Well, that's the point, Ed. Definitely, right? So for me, my mother always said it started when I was 3 years old. I was already in my mother, not talking about empathy. I had no clue what empathy was, but in that space of, trying to understand and to feel with, and always very tuned in, and also really having a need for others to see me and to tune into me and to tell me that I was a lovely girl, and the things that a 3-year-old needs, or I did as a 3-year-old. But then yeah, my history is different. So when I was 19 years old, I lost a sister, and she was murdered. It was a very violent death, and of course very upsetting in our family. And at that moment, I had just finished my high school, so I was about to start studying, and I wanted to study psychology, and I thought, can't do that, I'm one of those people with troubles now. I can't study psychology anymore. So I went and worked for a year for a publisher, and I went quite quickly up in that organization and was really interested in that work and thought, actually, who needs studying? I can do this. I like this. Up to a point where there was a job for a project leader, and I applied for the job, and the HR professional said, no way, you haven't even studied. You're 19 years old. What are you doing here? Go study. So I thought, oh, okay. So I thought, well, I did want to get into that type of job. So I thought I need to go study. So I did. I studied organizational and social psychology. And during my 3rd year of my study, there came a project along about the influence of empathy versus personal distress on helping behavior. So what determines whether we help others, and what's the role of being distressed when we are in front of the suffering of others versus having empathic concern with others? So I found that fascinating, and I thought, well, let's jump in. So I did that project. I did my master's on it. Then there came a PhD project out of that, and I just went on. I thought, this is really amazing. I want to do this work. So I've been working on that all in all about 6 years. Then I had my PhD after 4 years, so about 6 years in total. But then I also discovered that the academy is only that empathic, right? It is quite a competitive and a tough environment, and it's not an environment where empathy was that high up in the agenda. And I thought, you can't study this type of stuff and not practice it. It's not, you need to put all that talk about empathy into actual practice. So there I decided I need to do that. I want to keep on doing some research, keep on teaching in university. I love doing those things, but also take this out into the world and really look at, what do we do with empathy in the world? How can we practice this? And it was interesting because in those days, that was 20 years ago, right? There were not that many people working on empathy at all. And during my PhD project, I always needed undergraduate students to help me with the research. That's how it works in the university. So you ask some undergraduate students, hey, I've got this nice study, you want to do that for a project? And they were like, no, empathy? Nah, no. We want to do marketing and influencing behavior. That was hot in those days. Empathy was absolutely not interesting. So you see, that has changed enormously over the past 2 decades. And now we're almost at the other point of that scale, where empathy, it's all over, it's everywhere, and it's difficult to keep up, right? So I did that. I worked partly in academia, but I started my own company, and I started developing empathy training, basically. So I spoke about empathy, I did that type of stuff, but also I was really working on, how do we do this? And I've been doing that for quite a few years. I met Edwin Rudge somewhere in the middle. Some people might have heard of him. He's out there on the internet with everything empathy related. So A Culture of Empathy is his website. If you're interested, have a look. And with him, I started developing part of the work that Katherine and I are doing now. So we did some work together. I was in the Netherlands. I did a lot of training with a very different group, educators and firemen and consultants and what have you. engineers, really different people from different backgrounds, healthcare, wherever people were interested. And that was that. So I keep doing that, worked a few years with Edwin. Then we separated ways again because we had different interests, and empathy is so vast, you can do so many different things with it. And I love really keep on developing this work. I think that's really what interests me most, is to put it in practice, help people to develop that, but also to help develop that work and to integrate all the different perspectives that are out there on this subject. And so Katherine and I found each other and we started working together, and we were very complementary to each other. We came from different backgrounds. We have a little age difference. She came from a much more coaching setting, while I came from a much more academic, the theory of empathy and all the research around it. She was very good at qualitative research. I was very good at quantitative research. So we were very complementary to each other. And we have very different personalities as well. And in all of that, we found each other in, hey, this is something we're both very serious. Huh, Katherine? Both very serious. We do what we say we do, and we really work well together. Even while she's in South Africa and I'm in France, that's not a problem.
You've been Zoom experts before the pandemic, haven't you? You've
Yeah.
been doing this for years.
Yeah.
Well, we started out as Skype experts, and then we progressed.
Dumped Skype and got to Zoom. No,
as long as we have an internet connection, we're good.
Yeah, and it's testament to how you can work with people who are from different cultures, different backgrounds, and and I think people would assume that when they see empathic intervision, okay, they both study empathy in the same way, and actually that's what's great about that. You bring those different approaches, and then together you brought those different approaches, and after the NGO work that you did, you came up with there's many things that you do, like you say, and you do training, but one of the things that drew us together was the 5 skills. Sorry, that's my the fact that I live by a main road in London. A bit of atmosphere for everyone. Welcome, yeah. But you said, those 5 skills, those 5 integrative empathy skills, and as you said at Lidewij there, these are constantly developing, and you're working on them. And can you just tell us, firstly, what are the 5 skills? Obviously, we have so little time, and you do this over a year-long course. But what are the 5 skills, and then how have you made them so that they fit into people's lives and work?
Well, I feel I've been chatting so long, so shall we give Katherine first again?
Okay. Yeah, so the 5 skills are, first of all, the self-empathy that we've spoken a bit about. And then the next one is what we call kinesthetic empathy. And that is more about, in a sort of its simplest version, body language, becoming aware of body language. But in order that you can synchronize with people, so connect with people through not speaking, but actually just body language and movement. And then also being able to hold a space, but physically in your body, not verbally. So that's the one. And then the next one is what we call reflective empathy. And that is really about listening. So it's a particular type of listening where you can make sure that you can reflect back to the person who's speaking what they've said. So you've listened, you can hold the content of it, and you can reflect back to them so that they know that they have been heard. Then the third one is imaginative empathy, and that is more about the stepping into the shoes of other people. So that is finding, different people have such different perspectives. And first of all, you want to really know what are those perspectives. So listening to them in a way that you can identify their perspective, and then being able to, in a sense, in an embodied way, put yourself into that perspective so that you can gain an experience of it. And what that's about is identifying all the diversity. So it might be in a in your classroom if you're learning, or amongst your family or amongst your friends, so you can recognize all the diversity, understand something about it, and then also gain some experience about it. And then we always work with the empathy, not just as a, nice to do, but actually as a means to an end. So you're empathizing for a reason, because you want to help someone or achieve something. And so empathic creativity is about gathering all the little sort of significant moments that have happened through the listening, through the connecting, through the finding the perspectives, and convert that. So people might suddenly have an aha moment, or people might suddenly feel really, have a difficult experience. You want to take that and then work it into something that you can actually do, that can help make a difference.
I think that's the key element there, is the doing.
Mm.
What is the purpose of empathizing with someone if it doesn't lead to some sort of action? And it doesn't have to be an action towards someone else. I think I'm right in saying that could be an action that you change yourself. And I think that leads, Lidewij might want to add on that, but that leads really nicely into this idea of empathy and always being associated with compassion and someone who's had a negative experience. And that's actually one of the troubles that I face with, pushing Empathy Week forward and for schools, is it's not about just compassion based. And yes, some of the films that we've had are quite sad and things, but also have huge amounts of positive elements that we're trying to reach out. How do we move that conversation, I suppose, as we're in the empathy space, all of us, like, how do we move that conversation from, it's always about, help, feeling for someone who is worse off than us, when actually we can gain so much from empathizing with someone who has so much more than us, maybe in material goods or knowledge or whatever it is. How do we do that?
Not sure if I can answer the question how we do that, but I think it all starts with that awareness. When you look into the history of empathy, it's coming from the arts, it's coming from aesthetics, it's coming from, you see a court dancer on a rope dancer, how is it called? Something like that.
Tightrope dancer, yeah.
Thank you, that one. Dutch. And so you see that balancing on the rope, right? And so that's where our kinesthetic empathy is also tapping in. You see that balancing, and you start in your own body, you start feeling that tension, you start balancing, you feel that, this. So the history of empathy is about, we have an enormous amount of experiences, and it's not all suffering, right? We're suffering in life, but we're not only suffering in life, even in these times, right? Where there's a lot of good experience as well. So it's about having the awareness to hold the space for that good experience as well. It's not about you're worse off and I feel so sorry for you. And this is also why when we speak of empathy, we often say empathy is neutral. Empathy is not a good thing, and it's not a bad thing. Right? There's a lot of discussion in the empathy world about empathy is good, empathy is bad. It's not good, it's not bad, it's neutral. It comes with an intention. So what are you trying to do with your empathy? That's the question. And so celebrating the happiness of somebody else is as empathic as trying to understand the misery of another person. And in celebrating the happiness of another person, other things happen, right? We get affected differently. And so that actually leads to a very positive energy that you can then use again out there in the world. Is that a bit of an answer?
Yeah, no, it's like you say, I don't think there is a particular answer, but that's an amazing way to look at it. And I think we skirt over positive elements of our life all the time as well. If we bring it back to self-empathy, understanding the great things that we have achieved or that we've overcome, and how can we do that more? I think that idea of empathy being neutral is such a an amazing way to look at it, because we do see empathy as great, and because it allows us to connect to people more, blah, blah, blah. But can too much empathy be bad? Is the next point. What is too much empathy? What is...
So I have a bit of an, I mean, I've thought quite a lot about this question, and I think that for me, often empathy is confused. There's a lot of different experiences that one can have that are confused with empathy, or are part, you can also put them under the empathy umbrella. So if you're empathizing with a person who's suffering, you might call it empathic distress, which can also lead into personal distress. And yet you can also develop yourself. So this is where the self-empathy comes in. You can develop yourself in a way where you can see the distress of another person, and it doesn't lead you to feel personal distress. So you have kind of, in a way, strengthened parts of yourself in a way that you can hold that space without it really impacting you in a very negative way. So I think definitely if you're a person who empathizes and you tip into personal distress or empathic distress, it's going to be very tiring, and it's going to impact you in a negative way. But if you are a person who can, in a sense, hold more of a neutral space, so you're there, you're very present, and you're feeling it, but it's not hooking inside of you, then it can be quite energizing for you. So I think that, you know, there's an endless supply of people needing to be understood. So there will be always an endless need for empathy. But you, as the person who wants to empathize, I think for you it depends on noticing, is this drawing me down? Is it tiring me? Is it draining my energy? And then I'll need to perhaps draw back a little bit, go and do something else, care for myself a bit. If it's energizing and it's actually building me up, then, you know, maybe I can do it again and again and again. So I don't think there's one size fits all. I think it really depends on you as the person who want to be empathetic or empathic. How does it impact you? What is the effect on you? And can you sustain it or not? And then there's really a choice, I think. And I think that's, you know, when you work with healthcare practitioners who constantly feel drained and tired by other people's difficulties, but they don't have a choice to stop or take a breather or do some self-care, then that often leads into compassion fatigue or burnout, which is not a good thing, because it's not really then helping anybody. And then often they then try to empathize, and it's actually, you know, it's leads to not a very good interaction with the people you're trying to empathize with. So I really think it depends a lot on your inner resources and how it impacts you.
There's a book called Pathological Altruism. I wouldn't recommend it to anyone but scientists, because it's quite heavy read. But it is about this, you know, again, empathy is often confused with saving the world, right? It is about this, if we get too much into trying to save, all sorts of other psychological processes are starting, right? There's a lot of things that are happening. And one of the things that often happens if we want to save the world is that we project what we think is the ideal or the good world onto that world and onto the people around us. So again, when you come to that neutrality of empathy, I think that's so important in this context, that, and also to learn when you start practicing empathy, that people are very capable of finding their own solutions to their problems. So once you practice empathy with people and you give them that space to explore their own way of handling things, they will be empowered, and you won't have to take on all their misery to save their world. They are very capable of saving their own worlds. All you want to do in empathy is hold that space. Somebody who listens, somebody who tries to think with them, understand them, try to, how does that work for you? You know, no, not questioning, not just, here's the space, go explore what you need. And we will discover ourselves what we need in that situation. Right? And then that all that world saving can be just holding space and giving, empowering people to do their own best thing.
Such a it's brought back a few stories and things that I've heard, that idea about, you know, it's not about saving people, it's about holding space. And I can't remember now the name of this man. It is a TED Talk, quite a well-watched one, but it's an Italian man who I think worked for an NGO, and it was after the Rwandan genocide, and they kind of, a few Italians through various, you know, organizations came in, and I'm sure, you know, the world really responded after that. But they were, I think they're in the hills of Rwanda, and were saying, you know, this soil is so good for growing tomatoes. Why don't you grow tomatoes? Grow tomatoes, grow loads of tomatoes. You know, and he says it in a very funny way in his Italian accent, and he's just like, oh, it's, you know, it's going to be amazing. And all the Italians were like, wow, you know, this is going to be the best tomatoes. We're going to have to export them back to Italy. And the Rwandans were there, and they were going, you know, like, you know, can I say something? And no. And they planted all these tomato trees, and the tomatoes grew, and they were delicious. They were amazing. And then one night, a herd of hippos went through and destroyed everything. They ate the whole lot. They were all gone. And the Italians were like, you know, distraught, and you know, and the Rwandans were saying, you know,
yeah.
We tried to tell you. Yeah, we saw that coming. We tried to tell you. And it's just like a great visual. He's a really good storyteller. I must find the link, but it's just a perfect example of, right, I've stepped into your shoes, but I haven't asked permission to do that. What do you need? You need food, and you need stability, and you need this. We have the knowledge to do that, and this would be great because we would love this. Exactly. And actually, they don't want tomatoes.
No.
And there's also a really good example, again, I can't find the source, but there was a water well project that was in the early 2000s, and they actually got some massive celebrities behind it, including Beyonce and Jay-Z, and it fell flat very quickly. What they decided to do in sub-Saharan Africa was get rid of water well pumps, because they thought it was demeaning for the women, especially women, to go and pump water all day out of a well and then carry it. And they thought, well, why don't we just create a roundabout and a playground for kids, and as they're playing on the roundabout, the water will be lifted up, and there'll just be they'll just have to turn a tap on. What they I don't know how they didn't think of this, but what they didn't think about is the fact that the wells are so deep, and the pressure to pull that water up has to be so strong. So the kids were too small, and they couldn't push the roundabout. I've taken this webinar over now, but this story is so great. The kids couldn't push the roundabout, so they couldn't play on it anyway. And what happened is the women went from pumping it to pushing a roundabout and becoming even more, you know, embarrassed about the situation. They weren't even embarrassed before to pump water. It was just like, that is a culturally acceptable thing to do, and that's how they get their fresh water. And it's this idea again of, you know, we see a problem, we go to solution, but actually in the middle is this process of empathy.
Exactly. Yeah.
And
the importance of, you know, that's why we insist also so much on the self-empathy, the importance of not projecting yourself, your ideas on the other person. That's not what empathy is about.
Your top tips for building empathy, whether that's personally or in an organization, or as lots of the people watching this, students, if you're at school and things like that, we were thinking, how do you develop your empathy for the best possible outcome for yourself and other people around you?
I think when you're young, you've got all the advantages of the world, right? I'm starting to count myself amongst the oldie goldies nowadays. A bit early, but you see, I think the older you get, the more ingrained you get in your patterns, in the way you see the world, in your understanding of it. That's why old people, you know, they always, oh, in my days, it was always better. It's always better in my days, because in those days they were young. And what do you have when you're young? You have openness, you have curiosity, you're able to hold that space for all these different perspectives without immediately finding something of it, right? Just you're curious. So I think that, so making use of that, keep on being curious, learning about all these different things, and not thinking in terms of it must be this way. The world's not black, the world's not white, the world's all these shades of gray, right? And being able to keep on looking at that and just celebrating every time you see a new perspective, rather than comparing it with your own and saying, oh, that's not my perspective, that's not how I would do, that's not interesting. What's interesting is that there is so many ways of doing things, and that when you're young, you have that ability to look at that and to wonder and to think, wow, maybe I should give that a try. I think that's great. Yeah.
Yeah. I think also, you know, one of the things that I feel is really important is to slow down and to take time. You know, I just wonder how often you last looked into the eyes of the people you were talking to, or how the last time that you actually looked up from your cell phone and actually engaged with a conversation. And so I think that also very much, you know, we're so busy all the time doing so much, and just slowing down and taking time and noticing the people around you can automatically spark that curiosity and interest and all the rest of it. Yeah.
Yeah, such an easy thing to say, but a harder thing to do, isn't it, these days? You think everyone goes, oh, lockdown, great, you know, but actually we just end up, I think, working more and looking at our phones more, and actually it's even harder to find that human connection. But that's a lovely point to finish on.
But it's also a choice, hey Ed. It's also a choice. It's very much, you know, we feel so disempowered, but you can choose to put that phone away. You can choose to slow down. You can choose to not take that next job, but say, hey, you know, there's choice always.
Yeah. There is. And actually that's what Sarah on one of our shows this morning was saying. Choice. We all have it. We don't think we do. But everyone in every situation has choice. It's just those choices are different. Yeah. But how can people follow the conversation? How can people be involved with what you're doing? I know you run courses. You're definitely on LinkedIn. How can people engage with you and keep up to date with what you're doing?
Yeah.
So we also are on Facebook and not on Instagram yet, but I imagine that Facebook might be a little more accessible to your listeners than LinkedIn.
TikTok as well. I don't know if you've thought about starting a TikTok account.
I do think we should do some
TikToking. Yeah, probably. So definitely Facebook, and we'll look at TikTok.
And Twitter and our website, empathicintervision.com. And for those youngsters who are on LinkedIn, who are thinking about LinkedIn, you know, I always, to my students, I say the same. You can't start young enough with LinkedIn. So come and find us, send us a connection request. And I have a group which I'm running over 10, 12 years or so now on LinkedIn, which is called Empathy Best Practice and Research Network. So with your empathic action projects, come in there, tell us about it. Yeah. Start these conversations. You know, there's plenty of people out there who are really happy and willing to help and to share and to think along. And so very welcome.
Yeah.
Amazing. And that's a great way to end as well. There are people out there that will help you always. You just have to ask for it.
Absolutely.
Katherine, Lidewij, thank you so much for being a support for Empathy Week, not just today and coming onto the show, but also throughout the past year, what people won't see is the amount of conversations we've had and discussions we've had about empathy and how do we put it into the world in a way that can be received and is true and correct as well. So honestly, thank you so much for everything you're doing, and yeah, lots to be learned from you still, for myself personally and for everyone watching, I'm sure as well. But it's time to say goodbye, and I'll speak to you soon.
Thank you, Ed.
My pleasure. Thanks.